You know, these stories and verses in the Bible that make us really uncomfortable, that make us cringe and stiffen up. This is certainly one of those today, isn't it? We read or hear or have to preach or lead a moment of wonder about these stories that our instinct is either to run as far away from them as we can or grab them by the shirt collar and throw them out of our canons altogether. It's our hermeneutical fight or flight response. It's what we do as human beings. We've learned to categorize things into boxes for our own good, for safety, for survival, or efficiency, or flourishing, or love, or growth. We do it with everything. Bears, snakes, spiders, needles, poison ivy, meatloaf, circus clowns, the Yankees, Justin Bieber, politics, theology, other people. We shuffle unrelenting, instantaneous information into myriad mental file folders or banking boxes or piles of clothes. Pick your preference. We categorize each bit of information into these piles or boxes or file folders that we, or most often our society, our churches, our families have designated for us, taught us, implemented for us. We do with everyday information what many of us do with our emails and inboxes. We slap a label on the email and it helps us find it later. It's a FBC Woo email, a finance team email, a newcomer's email, an encouraging email, an urgent email. And we open up the file folder maybe next month and there they all are, all the coordinating council email, all the adult ministry email. We do with everyday information what photographers do with every photo they shoot. They make constant adjustments to lighting and shutter speeds and angles and action. We do it with everything, like ramen noodles. For me, they get multiple layers, survival and efficiency and flourishing. For you, it might just be a health threat. The coronavirus. I've labeled that as a threat to my safety and a threat to other people's safety. It's scary, it's uncontrolled for the foreseeable future, it's disruptive, unfair, but it's not invincible. It can be mitigated with education or adaptation on my part, like wearing a mask, vigilance, hygiene. For you, how would COVID-19 be categorized? Maybe it's about safety or survival or danger or inconvenience. Maybe it's demanding or daunting or isolating. We do it with everything. A TV show, is it pleasure? Is it humor? Is it happiness? A song comes on the radio. Is it your favorite? Do you hate it? Is it not your style? Does it make you want to dance? A political ad comes on, and does it make you feel angry? Does it make you want to become more educated, learn new ideas, or does it just reinforce old ideas? A political party, is it A or B, right or wrong, true or false, good or bad, safe or danger, patriot or traitor, survival or threat? You see, sometimes our filters can get out of whack. Maybe the ISO on the camera was too high, or the shutter speed was wrong, or the flash was off, or the Snapchat filter was that high-pitched one. Filters aren't perfect, and oftentimes, they need adjusting. New locations, new subjects, new information require adaptation, changing the settings, the filters, the categories. Because sometimes our filters get out of whack. And I think that's what happens when we hear this story of Abraham and Isaac. I think that's what happened within the story of Abraham and Isaac. Right out of the gate, the story says God wanted to test Abraham. And then, as we heard, the story says God told Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac, the very son that God had promised to Abraham, that Abraham would have a great nation. So Abraham goes along with it, brings Isaac up a mountain, and even presses the wood upon Isaac to carry up the mountain to his own harm and death. And once there, the altar set up, and an angel intervenes to stop Abraham. A ram appears in the bushes, and Isaac's life is spared, as we read. And it's a terribly unsettling story that we often file in that let's ignore it pile, or the throw this out of our Sunday school curriculum forever pile. For good reason, I think, oftentimes. Today's story is a tough one. The easy interpretation of God testing Abraham's faith might seem straightforward enough. After all, the text itself says as much. But it's rife with violent theology that necessitates we attribute violence to God's character, and that subliminally or overtly justifies violence against others in the name of God, just like Abraham was willing to do to Isaac. A more difficult interpretation would require that we examine Abraham and his choices. If this story was passed down, it was passed on because that's how the story was told by Abraham or his descendants all those generations later, which is why the story might be told as it is. But what if Abraham was wrong? What if it wasn't the voice of God, but maybe some other religious influence in his day that compelled him to sacrifice his son? Or maybe it was something else entirely, an unstable thought that he chased, and only then did God intervene to protect the child at the end. Whatever the hypothetical case may have been, what do we not see from Abraham either way? It seems that he files this information, this voice or thought or whatever he had, he files it into the folder that is from God. And he never questions that again. He just goes along with it without examining it, without interrogating it, without challenging it. He lacks any curiosity except how to enforce or reinforce what he already believes he heard. He wonders how to get the logs up the hill, how to get the donkey prepared for the journey, how to ensure that the donkeys are taken care of as he and Isaac continues up the mountain. Those are the ridiculous minor details Abraham focuses on because he thought he'd already filtered the major stuff correctly. And I wonder if we don't land on the side of easy interpretation of this text, that God wanted to test Abraham's faith in some cruel game of Yahweh roulette, rather than believing Abraham might have been tragically mistaken, because we'd rather ignore or blame God than recognize ourselves in the story. We'd rather filter it out than filter ourselves in. All too often, we are Abraham in this story. And you might be asking, how is that? Those times when we aren't curious enough, when we don't challenge the status quo, when we filter the major information into folders and we focus on the minor detail. All the while, LGBTQ youth are being kicked out of their Christian homes and sacrificed in the name of God, like Isaac. And meanwhile, Black lives are still being oppressed and mistreated and discriminated against and killed and shackled by unjust policies and theologies, sacrificed in the name of God, like Isaac. Our churches have been a part of these theologies of violence, refusing to challenge the easy interpretations or their harmful applications, preferring to ignore them or throw them out, saying, that's not us, or we shouldn't talk about that in church, fleeing or fighting the minor inconveniences of discomfort, but never interrogating problematic texts, theologies, policies, or beliefs themselves. When our filters get out of whack, We can do the easy task of staying put with distorted and one-sided beliefs in the status quo. Or we can do the hard work of taking in new information, listening to multiple views and perspectives, and then incorporating that information into creating new filters instead of filing it away into the outdated folders that perpetuate harm, even and especially in the name of God. Curiosity is a vital component of our faith, and it's a necessity for our shared life together. And as a church, we haven't done everything perfectly. We have many things from which to confess, and to repent. But when I think of curiosity, one glaring example comes to mind in our church in the 1990s when we modeled that posture of curiosity and voted to become a welcoming and affirming congregation in 1993. We listened to the perspectives and experiences of LGBTQ persons outside the church and even from those within, whether they felt safe enough to speak out from that space or not. People learned and listened in our church, and we're still learning from and celebrating the perspectives and experiences of LGBTQ persons within and outside our church today. We're the best versions of ourselves, of our church, of humanity as followers of Christ, when we are curious before we are paralyzed, when we are inquisitive before we fight against new perspectives, when we are transforming and choosing to change and adapt and to learn. Over the past few weeks, Kelsey and I have introduced our dogs to one another. And so Liza, Kelsey's dog, and Zoe, my dog, they had to meet. And when they first met, they sort of had this posture of self-protection. I don't think either of them were really afraid that great harm was going to come, but they were nervous, they were anxious, they were sort of checking each other out. 3 weeks later, they're great for the most part. But there was that process of figuring each other out, watching and testing and getting on each other's nerves a little bit. But now, last night, they slept on the bed together. This week, we had to introduce Zoe to Kelsey's cat, Higgins. And that is a whole new sort of circling and learning. And I'm watching Higgins. Zoe wants to go and play, but Higgins is afraid. The cat is afraid, curious, and sort of the posture of Higgins is very tense and fearful. And Googling how to introduce dogs and cats suggests that you slowly introduce one another, and then you let them see each other in a safe space, all this common sense of stuff. And I guess I've been thinking of that when I think about our posture as human beings, as siblings in faith and life. We have at times a real openness to seeing other perspectives, to learning. It might be uncomfortable at first, but maybe like Liza and Zoe, it's easier to adapt and adjust. And then there are other times where it's really hard, and we're really afraid of changing, of growing, of new information coming into the mix. And the trick is to keep learning, to keep trying, to keep being curious. Because the reality is, we're human beings. We aren't dogs and cats. We can take in new information And we can create new folders or files or piles of clothes that we sort things into. We don't have to remain in a fight or a flight option, in a survival, a safety, threat, risk option. Curiosity is how we get through that to a new way of being and living together. And as Christians, so much of our faith lived out as a posture of humility and service and curiosity, learning from one another's experiences. So I want to ask you, as honest as you want to be with yourselves, I guess, when is the last time you took in new information without sending it straight to one of your filtered boxes? When's the last time you were curious about another point of view, but not simply so that you could reinforce your own point of view? When's the last time you were wrong? And when's the last time you admitted that? To yourself, to another person, about another person? When's the last time you changed your mind? And I'm not talking about dinner. When's the last time you changed your mind about something significant? When's the last time you changed a political belief or a theological belief? And why? How did it feel? Why don't we do it more often? What are we so afraid of? Last week, I used a quote from Margaret Wheatley's book, and it was simply, who do we choose to be? And I think it's a guiding question for us over the weeks to come. Who do we choose to be? Hardened, like we need some kind of exoskeleton of hardened beliefs? Or curious, adaptive, learning people? Who do we choose to be? Will we be curious this week? Amen.